At 1:43 in the morning on March 14, 2024, a signal activated inside an Antarctic research station.
The probe was stationary at 800 meters below the lake's surface.
The probe was not damaged. All systems showed green. It had simply stopped moving, in a lake that by every scientific parameter could not contain anything capable of stopping it. And then something moved through the frame. Not microbial, not chemical. A physical displacement of water by...
The microbiologist had spent 12 years studying organisms that survive where survival should be impossible. The engineer had designed the probe herself and knew every component better than her own hands. She pulled up the full technical...
3 facts. The probe had stopped itself. Something had moved through the water, and whatever it was still...
The commander looked at the screen for a long moment and then made the decision that would later be called either the bravest or the most reckless in...
The second probe carried a more powerful camera and 4 times the lighting capacity of the first.
Spoilers. To understand what happened that night, you need to understand where they were. Lake Vostok lies beneath 4 kilometers of...
The mission had been 18 months in planning. A new sterile access technology developed specifically for this lake. 3
She had spent years building this system for exactly this moment, running every calculation so many times that she said sustenance. She had spent years preparing for every possible outcome this lake could produce, building protocols for scenarios ranging from minutes. The night before the probe deployment, none of them slept much. The station was quiet but not still. Each of them were to them. She told me later that what she was thinking about that night was not the probe or the lake or the scientific significance.
Dr. Voron had a list of questions she had been working on since graduate school. Questions about the boundaries of life on Earth.
At 0600th on March 14, 2024, all through the drill site.
The drill broke through the ice ceiling above the lake at 11:23 in the morning. The sterile seal held. The first probe entered the lake water at 11:47 and began its descent. Initial readings were completely normal.
The biological sensors on the first probe were picking up exactly what the models had predicted. Ancient bacterial signatures. The water of Lake Vostok on that camera feed was the darkest water any of them had ever seen on a monitor. Black in a way that clean water is not black.
Dr. Voron leaned forward at 720 meters and said 2 words that changed the entire character, everything that followed. She traced the movement pattern on the screen without speaking for almost a full minute, and when she finally turned to the others, the camera showed nothing. The sensors showed movement. Something was in that water that the probe lights could not reach and the camera could not capture. They discussed it for 4 minutes. The commander asked 2 questions. First, is the probe safe to descend further?
She initiated the descent command at 2:17 in the morning. The probe began moving deeper into water that no instrument had ever reached before.
The water got darker as the probe went deeper. Not because the lights were failing, but
At 900 meters, the movement signatures strengthened. Whatever was down there was not moving away from the probe.
She said it quietly enough that only the commander heard it clearly. She said it is maintaining distance, not fleeing. At 1,000 meters, the probe lights caught something at the very edge of their range.
The engineer pushed the camera enhancement to maximum and the shape became clearer. Not a rock formation, not an equipment.
Nobody spoke for 40 seconds. That is a long time when you are standing in a research station at 2 in the morning looking at an image. The commander was the first to speak. She did not make an announcement or a declaration. She asked a practical question.
The engineer rerouted power from non-essential probe systems to the lighting array in under 3 minutes. The camera range extended by instance. What the camera showed when the extended lighting activated was something that none of the scientific literature on isolated lake ecosystems had prepared. It turned toward the light. In a lake that had known no light source for 1 million years, the shape... She was recording everything simultaneously. Behavioral data, movement patterns, the response to light stimulus, the physical dimensions.
As it moved closer to the probe, the camera began resolving structural details, not the simple uniform surface of a pyramid. The commander began a verbal record at 2:34 in the morning. Her voice was completely steady. She stated the time.
For 6 minutes and 40 seconds, the probe camera recorded continuous footage of something in Lake Vostok that no existed.
At 6 minutes and 40 seconds, the engineer said quietly that the probe power reserves had dropped to the level where continued operation at current...
She had 30 seconds to decide. Continue recording and risk losing the probe and all the data it carried. Or begin retrieval immediately.
Begin retrieval. She said, begin retrieval.
Spirits. It moved back into the darkness the way it had come from the darkness, slowly and without apparent urgency, and within 90 seconds. The three of them stood at the console watching the empty camera feed as the probe ascended for 22 minutes. Nobody spoke. The probe completed its retrieval at 3:41 in the morning, all samples intact, all recording data preserved, the probe systems fully functional.
By 4 in the morning, they had been awake for over 20 hours. The probe was secured. The data was preserved on 2 separate systems.
They watched the footage 4 times before anyone spoke about it in anything other than technical terms.
Look at the movement here. This is not random. This is directed.
List. The movement at the 40-second mark showed a change in direction that had no fluid dynamic explanation.
She worked through the footage frame by frame for the next 2 hours, building a behavioral analysis of something that had never been behaviorally analyzed before.
She told me that on that flight she was thinking about every paper she had written, every lecture she had given, every
Antarctica is the largest wilderness on Earth and one of the most effective keepers of secrets.
The base where they landed was larger and more populated than the station they had left, and the contrast hit all 3 of them differently.
The debrief lasted 4 hours. The officials asked specific questions, and the 3 women answered with the same precision they had applied to every... She said later that what struck her most about the debrief was that the officials asked their questions with the manner of people who had already seen the footage.
The sample analysis results were treated as the most sensitive element of everything they had brought back. The biologist was asked to describe her findings verbally 3 separate times.
The engineer spent 2 hours with technical personnel she had never met, going through every aspect of the probe design, the sensor systems, and the data they... They sat together again in the common area when the debriefs were done, and the feeling was different from the coffee at the station in the morning. She told me that signing the agreement had not felt like suppression. It had felt like responsibility. They stood outside together for a while before the transport arrangements separated them. The sky had cleared a little, and the ice... The biologist looked out at the ice for a long time. Below everything she could see, 4 kilometers down through ice. The engineer said that what she felt most clearly standing there was that the probe had done exactly what she had built it to do. The transport that would take them off the continent was being prepared on the runway. In a few hours, the Antarctic ice sheet would be below them, but the aircraft climbed away from the ice, and within minutes, the base was a small cluster of buildings on an incomprehensibly large entrance. The initial analysis of the water samples took 40 minutes. What they showed was consistent with ancient isolated water chemistry.
She said that the biological material in the samples did not match any organism in her reference database. She said it appeared to be cellular in structure.
Dawn came to the Antarctic station the same way it always did, slowly and without ceremony. Pale light spread.
She stood at the window for a while, watching the light come up. The report was drafted. The data was secured. The samples were sealed.
At 7:15 in the morning, all three of them sat down together for the first time since the alarm had gone off 5.5 hours earlier.
In the months after the expedition, the biologist returned to her normal research, lectures, papers, the ordinary professional life of a working scientist.
Replaced. The engineer returned to her work. She said that the technical questions raised by the probe's encounter with something that stopped its descent.
The world the three of them were returning to had not changed. The same conversations, the same concerns.
The commander remained involved in the formal process that her mission had initiated. She said she did not know how long that process would take or what.
Antarctica has kept its secrets for longer than human civilization has existed. One night of observation does not change.
The drilling site was sealed and the equipment removed within 2 weeks of the expedition's conclusion. The Antarctic surface
4 kilometers of ice. Then water. Then something that has been there for 1,000,000 years. The ice above Lake Vostok took approximately 15 million years to accumulate to its current depth. The same stars that were above the Antarctic station the night the probe went into the lake were above it every night for 1,000,000 years before that.
She gives lectures about extreme environment biology. She has given them for 12 years. The lectures have not changed dramatically since the expedition.
The engineer is working on the next generation system. She has not been officially asked to do this. She said that after what the first probe encountered, she found
The station at Lake Vostok continues to operate through the Antarctic winter. The lake 4 kilometers below it continues to exist. The commander told me that the experience has not made her certain about what was in that lake. She said certainty is not. The ice is still there. The lake is still there. The data is in the right hands. The samples are being analyzed by people with the right equipment. They boarded in the same order they did everything. The commander first, the biologist second, the engineer last. The flight from Antarctica is long. Long enough to sleep, if sleep is possible. Long enough to go over everything again. She watched the continent until it was below the cloud layer, and then she closed her eyes. Not to sleep. From altitude, Antarctica looks exactly as it always has. White, vast, featureless from this height.
The commander began writing her preliminary report at 4:15 in the morning. She later said that it was the most difficult.
The engineer was running every analysis tool available on the probe sensor data from the encounter. Movement signatures, water displacement.
At 5:30 in the morning, the engineer said based on the water displacement data, she had calculated a minimum mass for the object.
The number is 9 billion kilograms.
Run it again.
The mass calculation came back the same both times. What the probe had encountered in Lake Vostok was not a small organism adapted to extreme conditions. The water samples the probe had collected during its descent through the encounter zone were the only physical material they had from the lake. Whatever had been...
By 6 in the morning, they had assembled everything into a single coherent picture. 6 minutes and 40 seconds of footage.
This is what the surface looks like. This is what you see from above. 4 kilometers below this is a lake the size of a country. This is the last frame of the footage before the probe began its ascent. The shape moving back into the darkness of a lake that had been sealed